Hello, it's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Now, NHS hospitals have been accused today of serious failings and missed opportunities to stop a maintenance worker from abusing dead bodies in their morgues. David Fuller sexually assaulted the bodies of more than 100 women and girls between 2005 and 2020. Our Home editor, Jason Farrell, has been speaking to the mother of one of those young women, who has called on the head of the NHS Trust to take responsibility.
Miles Scott needs to take responsibility, and the board, for failing their own government guidelines, for lack of curiosity, for allowing my daughter and many other victims, mothers, aunties, daughters, sisters, grannies, to be repeatedly abused.
Also to come, parts of the UK braced for snow and ice overnight. Yellow weather warnings are in place for Scotland and the northeast of England. The National Grid is saying it's going to activate its blackout prevention scheme tomorrow for the first time this winter. A controversial new book about Harry and Meghan has been pulled from shelves in the Netherlands. This is after reports that it contains the name of the member of the royal family who raised concern about the colour of Archie's skin. We'll have the latest from our royal correspondent. And it's 35 years since 270 people were killed in the Lockerbie bombing, the UK's deadliest ever terror attack. Tonight we'll be hearing from Dr. Jim Swire, whose daughter Flora was one of those killed, as a new documentary revisits events to find out just what happened. All that to come, and much more on the UK Tonight. A damning report has found a man who sexually abused the dead bodies of more than 100 women and girls was able to offend for so long because of serious failings at the NHS hospitals where he worked. Hospital electrician David Fuller, who was later convicted of murdering 2 women in the 1980s, assaulted the bodies of women and girls for 15 years at Kent and Sussex Hospital and the Tunbridge Wells Hospital. Our Home editor, Jason Farrell, joins me in the studio now. And Jason, this is a story that you have covered from the start, from the uncovering of David Fuller's awful crimes, and it's just horrific. Yeah. What's happened today? What's the significance of the findings?
Well, there's no doubt that David Fuller was just brilliant at keeping secrets, darkest of secrets. And this is really the uncovering of how he was able to do that. Of course, it started with those 2 murders in 1987 that he kept secret for many, many years. But he also had 800,000 images and 500 videos of himself carrying out this abuse in this mortuary. And the depressing thought is that he might well have been doing it still today had it not been for advances in DNA by the officers investigating the double murders that ultimately led them to knocking at his door. And a warning, this report contains distressing content.
Hello. Morning. David, it's the police. Hello. We need to come and speak to you. Oh, yes, come.
When David Fuller was arrested for double murder, no one could imagine the other crimes he'd been committing.
Seize the drawer, pull the drawer out, put it in the bag.
Yeah, you just want the whole lot done like that?
The whole lot, yep. I'll have that one as well.
But computer files discovered in his house showed he'd filmed himself raping corpses in the hospital mortuary where he worked as a maintenance supervisor.
Are they ones he's taken?
Well, why does that person look dead?
The question since has been how could he have got away with it for 15 years? The answer came today: multiple failings.
Senior management of the Trust had been aware of problems with the running of the mortuary from as early as 2008. But there is little evidence that effective action was taken to remedy these issues or that the Trust board paid any attention to the mortuary. Had his colleagues, managers and senior leaders been more curious, it is likely that he would have had less opportunity to offend.
The inquiry found Fuller accessed the mortuary at Maidstone Hospital 444 times in 1 year alone, and this went unquestioned. He often gave non-credible reasons. The Trust's policy was he could do so unaccompanied, even though national guidelines said the opposite. Azra Kamal was one of more than 100 victims. They ranged in age from 9 to 100 years old. Azra's mother, Nevraz, can't understand why the Trust's chief executive, Miles Scott, hasn't already resigned.
And Miles Scott need to take responsibility, and the board, for failing their own government guidelines, for lack of curiosity, for allowing my daughter and many other victims, mothers, aunties, daughters, sisters, grannies, to be repeatedly abused.
The inquiry found other failings, bodies left out of fridges overnight against regulations. The Trust chief executive apologised to the families and added this.
Clearly there's some important lessons for us here. Now, we've made many changes at our hospital since Fuller's offending came to light, and I'm confident that our mortuary today is safe and secure.
Are you going to consider your position? Are you going to resign?
No. NHS England expect me to implement the recommendations of Sir Jonathan's report.
His actions were unthinkable, but today's report says if access was better monitored, CCTV installed, if there hadn't been what the inquiry called a persistent lack of curiosity, Fuller could have been stopped.
Jason, it really is the most horrendous of crimes. Where does this go from here?
Well, no resignations, as you heard there, which will be disappointing to people like Nevruz Kamal, who were calling for those resignations, considering the catalogue of failings that were unveiled by the inquiry. We've also had apologies from Maria Caulfield, Health Minister, who's apologised on behalf of the government and said that lessons have been learned, that they've put in new procedures and practices. They've asked all mortuaries to look at how CCTV is monitored, for example, swipe cards, access, who's gaining access to mortuaries. And then the inquiry expands outwards now. So next year, it will be looking at private mortuaries, at funeral directors, at ambulance services, because the sad and depressing thought is that, of course, there could be other people out there who have the same ideas as David Fuller, and we have to be alive to that, and we have to make sure that whatever the circumstances in which a dead body is kept, that they are protected from people like him.
Yeah, very much so. Jason, thank you. Jason Farrell there. Now, the former boss of Wilco has apologised to the thousands of people who lost their jobs when the high street store went bust. Lisa Wilkinson today told MPs that the chain just ran out of cash and said that soaring interest rates after Liz Truss's mini-budget last year were partly to blame. Sky's business correspondent Adele Robinson has this report.
Finally, a day of reckoning for some of the thousands of former Wilco workers who lost their jobs, with a long-awaited apology from the granddaughter of the retailer's founder.
I am sorry that we are not there supporting all those people anymore.
The discount chain collapsed with 12,000 jobs lost in August, but it's taken until now in front of MPs for the former chair to address workers.
Why have you not apologised until this morning?
I will be thanking my team members and my customers to my dying day. You will never find me saying anything else. I appreciate each and every one of them, and I echo your words. They were the bedrock of Wilco.
Ms Wilkinson said they ran out of cash, partly blaming interest rates after the disastrous mini-budget last autumn.
It looks to us, just on the numbers, like you're burgling a failing business.
Despite business struggling, the Wilkinson family paid itself millions in dividends. And on that, unanswered questions for former workers Tina and Nicola.
You know, how can you sit there, be a director of a company and say you don't know this and you don't know that, you don't understand money problems?
You don't know where the money's gone. It just doesn't make any sense. No. She wasn't sorry at all.
Crocodile tears, that's what she gave us, wasn't it?
Hundreds of branches on high streets across the country have disappeared.
With questions over how a 92-year-old business can fold in a space where others are succeeding. Lisa Wilkinson admitted she had no financial qualifications. MPs described significant management mistakes, but their main concern now is that £50 million pension pot deficit.
And how, if at all, that can be recovered.
There's often no immediate comfort for the workers when there are pension fund deficit issues, as there was in Wilco's. The process can be quite slow-moving. Unfortunately, the administrators will be engaged in terms of looking at what went wrong, how did the deficit arise, did monies go out of the company that should otherwise have been used to pay those pension contributions.
Meanwhile, many workers are left still looking for a job, with the question lingering whether these shops should or even could have stayed open. Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Supervisor at Wilco, Stacey Browning, joins me now from Worthing. Stacey, thank you so much for joining us on the UK Tonight. You watched Lisa Wilkinson today. She said she was devastated over the firm's failure. How did you feel when you listened to her explanation this afternoon?
Angry.
Angry?
Yeah, angry. I don't believe her sorry is heartfelt.
Yeah. She said she will be thanking members of her team and customers until her dying day, but she did have to be pushed by MPs to say the word sorry because it didn't come easily to her. When you hear her say that she'll thank you, her and her family will thank you to their dying day, how did that make you feel?
No, I don't believe it. If she's got to be prompted to say sorry twice, then no, I don't believe that at all.
There were some interesting details that came out today. A document seen by Sky News said that the Wilkinson family, it's a family-run business to this day, received $9 million in dividends between 2019 and 2022, the period when the chain was struggling. And yet today, she said, Lisa Wilkinson, that the family didn't have enough cash to get the business out of trouble. Does that ring true to you?
No, she had enough. They could have done a lot more, a lot sooner.
What's been life like for you since leaving Wilco, Stacey? Well, since leaving your job, let's face it, you did not leave voluntarily. We've heard Wilco employees say that, you know, the chain may have been family-run, but the staff itself felt like family. There were, you know, people that worked there for decades.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely were one big family. It didn't matter what store you were in. You could go to any store and still feel like a family. And it has been hard since, very hard for a lot of them.
What's it been like for you, Stacey?
Hard. Yeah, hard.
Losing your job like that, I don't know whether you're in the pension fund, because, you know, we're hearing that creditors for Wilco, whether they be, you know, suppliers or those in the pension fund, will get, at best, 4% of what they're owed. Did you leave Wilco with anything, with any support net?
No, we had to claim our redundancy through the government, so we left Wilco with nothing really. Yeah. Just the friends and family that we'd made in the process.
Yeah. And what about the retail prospects after leaving Wilco? Have you been able to find a job since, Stacey? What's that been like? Because, you know, let's face it, times are tough.
Yeah, I took a bit of time out, and yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. Wilco were a very well-paid job, and everything that's out there now is you're looking at a £3 or £4 drop in hourly rate. So it is going to be hard for a lot.
OK. Well, Stacey, look, best of luck to you. Thank you so much for coming on to react to what Lisa Wilkinson had to say today. That's Stacey Browning, former team supervisor at Wilco, speaking to us on the UK Tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, a controversial new book about Harry and Meghan has been pulled from the shelves in the Netherlands after what's been described as an error in the translation. It comes amid reports that the book names the member of the royal family who allegedly raised concerns about the colour of Archie's skin. Well, in a statement, Xander, the publishers of the Dutch translation, said Xander Uitgevers is temporarily withdrawing the book by Omid Scobie from sale. An error occurred in the Dutch translation and is currently being rectified. Let's go live to our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock. Laura, how could this have happened?
That, I think, is a huge question. If we take a couple of steps back and just remind ourselves what this was all about, the book in the English version has revealed that Charles was writing to Meghan in spring 2021, so not long after the couple had given that tell-all interview to Oprah Winfrey. He was writing letters to express not just the fact that he was disappointed that they'd gone public in this way, but also the thing that upset him most, the book claims, was Meghan saying that several conversations had taken place about the colour of Archie's skin when he was born. Now, we never found out in the interview who was making any comments. Names were certainly not named, but we did know that it was not the Queen and it wasn't Prince Philip either. That was as far as it went. In the book, the author, Omid Scobie, says the laws in the United Kingdom prevent me from reporting who they were. But in this weird twist today, it turns out that the Dutch version of the book has been pulled from the shelves with reports that that's exactly what the Dutch translation did. Names were named, basically. Look, we haven't got a copy of the Dutch translation. We haven't got a copy of the Dutch version of the book. So we can't read and verify exactly what's been going on here. But it is serious. You remember those comments in that Oprah interview caused a huge amount of controversy at the time. Lots of difficult questions, really, really difficult questions levelled at the royal family about institutional racism. Do you remember Prince William had to come out and say we're very much not a racist family? The book gives a bit more detail about the letters that were exchanged between Charles and Meghan, saying that they had conversations about it. A source says that Meghan didn't use the word racist or racism in her letters, that she was more concerned about a lingering unconscious bias within the family and ignorance that needed to be addressed. We're told, another source saying that the letters were respectful back and forth, but they were serious, saying that I don't know if those letters ended up with them seeing eye to eye in the end. There was at least a feeling that both had been heard, that is the King and Meghan. Like I say, though, this controversy about racism within the royal family has never gone away. You remember at the time it led to that famous statement being released saying that the allegations made within that interview were concerning. They would be addressed within the family, but that some recollections may vary. That infamous, very famous quote now. These allegations, though, still rearing their head. We always thought this book could be controversial for what it said, but definitely not for what it didn't say.
OK, Laura, thank you. Laura Bundock, our royal correspondent there. Yellow weather warnings have been issued for parts of the UK tonight. People being told to prepare for hazardous conditions with snow and ice expected. The Met Office says roads and railways are likely to be affected, with warnings issued from this evening right up until Thursday morning. The National Grid has also announced that it's going to be activating its blackout prevention scheme from tomorrow for the first time this winter. Well, the weather warnings affect northern and eastern Scotland, Shetland and Orkney, as well as the northeast of England and East Yorkshire. Forecasters are saying southeast England could see some snow flurries later on this week. Well, let's join Sky's North of England correspondent, Shingi Mawarike. He is in Sutton Bank on the edge of the North Yorkshire moors. Cold, I would imagine, Shingi. Any sign of that snow, though, yet?
Well, it is extremely cold, Sarah-Jane. I can tell you it is biting, but there aren't any signs of snow so far. The Met Office predicting that in some places we could see 1 to 3 centimetres of snow, and in some parts of northern Scotland up to 5 centimetres of snow. And with that comes the risk to people, but also the impact on infrastructure, which you just mentioned there, with the National Grid putting in place measures to ensure that certain people limit their energy usage, putting in place rewards for them in the form of money and other things as well. And I also think it's worth talking about that disruption to railways and also disruption to roads. So let me just tell you a bit more about where I am. This road is an A road which bends slightly, and that's the kind of dangerous conditions when icy, which could have a real danger to life and are extremely hazardous. And it's something that North Yorkshire Council take extremely seriously. They put in force a gritting operation. We've seen a gritter on the road in front of us on the way up here, just putting salt on the roads and trying to make sure that they're safe, that they're passable for people driving on them. And that operation is one that has seen new vehicles put in force last year, and it's one that they've suggested to us is extremely important in times like this. They've said that last year those gritters covered more than 400,000 miles. Just to put that in context, that's nearly the same as going to the moon and back. And just to end this on a slightly more serious note, this weather is a cold snap which will set in. The weather warning ends tomorrow at 11 a.m, but then there's another one in force, meaning that the conditions are set to continue like this for the next couple of days at least.
OK, Shingi, wrap up warm. Thank you. Still to come on the UK tonight, we'll have the latest on the UK's extraordinary diplomatic row with Greece over the Elgin Marbles. Also ahead, the first ever transatlantic flight powered purely by sustainable fuel touches down in New York. And we'll show you the amazing moment a pod of dolphins take part in lifeboat crew training off the coast of Scotland.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing. My most memorable story was covering the extreme zero COVID restrictions.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
This is essentially the epicenter of the epicenter. It's the Haiju district. The message from China is clear. This is a modernized military, absolutely able to fight an international war if needed.
This is a routine exercise. It's defensive in nature.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to.
Hey.
By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets.
To the left.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made. It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
There are people who are afraid.
On the streets of Xinjiang, there is still a tension. Heavy police, a sense they're always watching.
It's really an incredible eeriness to this place, and it just is completely abandoned. The Chinese housing market, for so long a driver of growth, is now a real liability. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's actually hard to describe the cold here. It's so intense. It literally takes your breath away.
I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling.
Welcome back. You're watching the UK Tonight. Here's what's coming up. We'll have all the latest from the COVID inquiry as Michael Gove apologises for mistakes made by the government during the pandemic. And our arts and entertainment correspondent is going to be rubbing shoulders with the stars on the red carpet at the Wonka premiere. But first, police in Northern Ireland have launched a major investigation into the clinical practices of a former consultant neurologist. Michael Watt is at the centre of Northern Ireland's largest ever recall of patients and was recently struck off the medical register. Police are now appealing for patients and families who may have concerns about their treatment to contact them. Our senior island correspondent David Blevins joins us now from Belfast. And David, a really concerning story this for those who were treated by the consultant. Give us a background to this.
Michael Watt was a consultant neurologist at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast, but he also practiced privately in Northern Ireland at the Hillsborough Clinic and the Ulster Clinic. So concerns about his clinical practice 5 years ago led to the recall of an unprecedented 4,000 patients here for their cases to be reassessed. He voluntarily removed himself at that point from the medical register, but two of his former patients challenged that decision in the High Court, arguing that there should be a public hearing. It's taken until this month for that public hearing to take place, and he was, earlier this month, struck off the medical register, the tribunal concluding that patients had indeed been put at risk due to misdiagnoses and unnecessary treatments. And now that that decision has been made, the Police Service of Northern Ireland say they have launched a major investigation to ascertain if there was any criminal aspect to his clinical practice, and that major investigation is being overseen by Detective Chief Superintendent Neil McGuinness.
I believe that we're now in the possession of sufficient material gathered from those people who have come forward and spoken to PSNI and expressed their concerns to us, as well as the various reviews and public inquiries and other material gathered by the various other inquiries into Michael Watt's clinical treatment, that we have carefully reviewed those. We have sought medical advice, we've sought legal advice, because it's a very complex area of the law, and we believe that there now is sufficient reason to launch an investigation.
So the investigation is taking place now, not just because the various medical tribunals have been completed, but because an estimated 20 former patients have contacted police to raise concerns, and detectives are now inviting other former patients and the next of kin of deceased former patients who also have concerns to come forward. They've set up a dedicated platform and telephone hotline. But let's be very clear at this stage, police have not yet ascertained that there was any criminal aspect to the clinical practice. They say it will be a lengthy and complicated process, and they appreciate how harrowing this is going to be for everyone concerned.
David, thank you. A man has admitted killing 2 university students and a caretaker in a spate of attacks in Nottingham earlier on this year. 32-year-old Valdo Calicane denied murdering Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates in June, but pleaded guilty to their manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. He also pleaded guilty to attempting to murder 3 others. A court has heard how 2 teenagers accused of murdering Brianna Ghey used a code word to indicate when the stabbing should start. 16-year-old Brianna was found with fatal stab wounds in Warrington in February. Prosecutors told the jury today that one of the teenagers also sent her co-defendant a picture of a handwritten note detailing the plan to kill Brianna. Both on trial deny killing the 16-year-old. The inquest into the death of head teacher Ruth Perry, who took her own life, has heard that she was highly distressed during the first day of an Ofsted inspection which identified shortfalls. The 53-year-old was head teacher at Caversham Primary School in Reading for 13 years before her death in January. Her sister has previously said that Mrs Perry experienced the worst day of her life when inspectors downgraded the school from outstanding to inadequate. The Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove has apologised for mistakes made by the government during the COVID pandemic. Mr Gove, who was Cabinet Office Minister at the time, told the COVID inquiry today that the government didn't go early or hard enough when bringing in restrictions.
I want to take this opportunity, if I may, my lady, to apologise to the victims who endured so much pain, the families who endured so much loss as a result of the mistakes that were made by government in response to the pandemic. And
just some news for you from the Middle East tonight. Israel's military says a further 12 hostages have been released under the terms of the truce with Hamas. 30 Palestinians will also be freed under this swap agreement. Well, among those Israeli hostages freed today, Ada Sagi, a 75-year-old grandmother. Now, you may remember her story. We have spoken to her son, Noam, who lives here in London, on the UK Tonight. Now, the first ever transatlantic flight powered purely by sustainable fuel has taken to the skies today, flying from Heathrow Airport to JFK in New York. The test flight is being powered exclusively by sustainable fuel, including cooking oil. Well, until now, regulators have only allowed airlines to use a maximum of 50% eco-fuel to power their engines. Sky's Jonathan Samuels has been on that flight, and he joins me now from New York. So, Jonathan, come on, how was it?
Hi, Sarah-Jane. Yeah, we landed about an hour and a half ago here at JFK in New York and left at 11:30 from Heathrow this morning. And as you say, the first flight, a record-breaking flight to cross the Atlantic in a long-haul jet airliner powered by 100% sustainable aviation fuel. Essentially, in the tank was used cooking oil. And I have to say, the flight was actually rather uneventful. I was sort of hoping that there might be a whiff of chip fat coming through the cabin, but nothing like it, because this fuel smells, looks and performs just like normal aviation fuel. But certainly Virgin and Rolls-Royce and all the team that have been putting this flight together over the last year, very happy with how it went.
No unsavoury odour, as it were. But tell me about the fuel, because it was partly made up by cooking oil, but it had other elements as well.
Yeah, 88% cooking oil and waste animal fats, that sort of thing. The rest was synthetic kerosene going into those engines. And SAF is great because it does mean that the flight we took was about 70% greener than every other flight that took off from Heathrow today. But of course, it does have a massive downside. It's really expensive to make, up to 5 times the cost of normal aviation fuel. Not only that, there simply isn't enough raw material to make this stuff, which means at the moment only 0.1% of planes in the air are using any SAF whatsoever. Now, the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, was on board the plane as well, and I put it to him that airlines say you need to do more to upscale this, and he said that the government is investing. The future really, SJ, is green technology, hydrogen, but that's decades away. So SAF is all we have for the moment. Environmentalists aren't particularly happy. They say it's going to use up too much land, too many crops, too much energy. They say that the real way to decarbonise the skies is to stop flying altogether. So I think this was an important step, but still a small step on what is a pretty turbulent flight path, I think, to guilt-free flying, which is something we'd all love.
Yeah. So that was the test flight that got you there. How are you getting back, Jonathan?
Say one more time, SJ.
I said that was the test flight getting you there. How are you going to get back?
Do you know what? It's a very good question. We haven't thought about that. How are we getting back? Who's thought about that?
I'll talk to my producers, see what we can do. Jonathan Samuels there in New York. Still to come on the UK tonight. 35 years on from the Lockerbie bombing, I'm going to speak to a father whose daughter was one of those killed in the UK's deadliest ever terror attack. And we'll have the latest on an intensifying diplomatic row over the Elgin Marbles. Welcome back to the UK tonight. Now, it has been 35 years since the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over the small village of Lockerbie in Scotland, in which 270 people died. A new Sky documentary revisits the story, speaking to residents, those involved in the investigation, and relatives of those on board to try and get to the truth behind the UK's deadliest terror attack.
Pan Am Flight 103 crashed in the Lockerbie area. 270 lives lost.
It was a terrorist attack.
Unbelievable.
Hundreds of people in mourning.
Flora was on that flight. I was determined to find out who'd done it.
The truth needs to be known about this case. Who got the warnings and what did our government do about it?
We have done what we had to do.
We were being deceived by the authorities.
To be lied to for 30 years.
The U.S. government had an agenda.
There's no shortage of suspects.
Nothing is what it seems in the Lockerbie story.
Well, it's a story we think we know so well, but it's never been put into a documentary before. One of the contributors to this series is Dr. Jim Swire. His daughter, 23-year-old Flora, booked a last-minute seat on that flight to visit her boyfriend. In her name, Jim has led a relentless campaign to find the truth behind the 1988 attack, from taking a fake bomb on a flight to highlight security failings, to meeting Colonel Gaddafi in secret and visiting the man he believes was wrongly convicted on his deathbed. I spoke to Jim, and I started by asking him about Flora.
She was a really lively, exciting girl to know. It wasn't, I never pushed her towards becoming a doctor, which is what she was, of course, in the process of doing at the time she was murdered. But she had lots of other interests. She was brilliant at singing. She had perfect pitch. She played the guitar beautifully. And the extraordinary thing about a ghastly event like this is it's hard to imagine that all that promise, all that pressure of life could suddenly stop. How could it? How could that happen? And to find that the actual details of the killing of Flora and all those 269 other people was being misrepresented by those to whom the government of both Britain and America had duties. And I believe one of the deepest duties of any government is to protect the lives of their citizens. And when I discovered within 10 days or so of the disaster that there had been very, very cogent warnings about what was going to happen beforehand, and when I heard the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and later on John Major and endless other Prime Ministers all saying, oh, no, we had no warnings, I've actually got copies of the warnings they received. Now, that's a terrible situation to arrive in.
Jim, you talk about the dereliction of duty of authorities of the government in getting justice for Flora and the other 269 people on board that flight. But you're fulfilling your duty as a father to advocate for your eldest daughter. And you've been conducting your own search for the truth, and you've become a spokesperson, or you became a spokesperson for the British families affected. Talk to me about the journey you went on to uncover what happened.
Yes, it started with my writing a letter to the Times almost immediately after the disaster had taken place, saying I didn't think much of security at Heathrow, which was a very prescient thing to say, as it now seems clear the bomb came on board at Heathrow, not Frankfurt, not Malta. But anyway, that's what I did, and it resulted in me being put in touch with somebody who was running a press bureau in London, and he showed me one of the two important warnings. There were two warnings beforehand that were so important. They both made me extremely angry. So anger propelled me to start with. But it was great to be, if you like, representing poor Flora, who wasn't there any longer to represent herself. So that it was a great privilege, actually. I wanted to get her name dissociated from the horror, not only of the ghastly catastrophe itself, but also for the consequences of that, which was so devoid of honesty and integrity from the government of the day.
Well, Jim, what a brilliant dad you have been on behalf of Flora, fighting for justice and get to the truth for 35 years. It took a number of years after the bombing, but two Libyan suspects emerged. Lamin Fabar and Abdel Basset al-Megrahi. Abdel Basset al-Megrahi found guilty. He was a Libyan intelligence officer. You were so shocked by the guilty verdict that you fainted. You never believed that he was responsible for this. Can you just explain to us why? So much so that after he was released on compassionate grounds because he had prostate cancer, you actually went to meet him.
We had one great stroke of luck, and that was that we made great friends with Professor Robert Black, who is Scotland's leading commentator on Scottish criminal law. And he was the originator of the whole idea of having a trial in a neutral country, but he was man enough to come to the conclusion and say so publicly that he did not think that that evidence under Scottish law justified the conviction of either of those two men. So there was an immediate major support, and that was supported also by the United Nations representative observing the trial.
What do you believe to be the truth about what happened to Flora? And do you think it will ever come to light? Will there ever be proper justice in your eyes for those responsible?
What happened to her is that one of the other things that I obtained access to after the disaster was a telex from the Department of Transport. And they'd received a warning from West Germany in October, which said these bombs were available, like I described to you, that would explode roughly 37, 38 minutes after a plane took off. And this telex to Heathrow was actually dated the 19th of December. What happened in the Department of Justice, in the Department of Transport in London, between the arrival of the warning in October and this telex in December? And the answer is not very much. The disaster happened on the 21st of December, so there had not been time for the contents of the telex to be distributed to the security people. What sort of security system is that? I would love to do something to improve the prospects of this kind of situation being handled responsibly in future instead of incredibly incompetently as it was back in '88. And that was why I later took a copy of the Lockerbie bomb on board another plane from Heathrow, just to show they hadn't made any difference in the security. And this is something for everyone to think about. What do people want to do to improve their chances of emerging at the other end of their flight without the risk of terrorists killing them en route?
Jim Swire talking to me a little earlier, and that documentary is available on Sky now. Downing Street has blamed Greece for a deepening row with the UK over the future of the Elgin Marbles. Number 10 says the Prime Minister cancelled a planned meeting yesterday with his Greek counterpart, accusing him of breaking an agreement not to lobby for the return of the artefacts to Athens from the British Museum. However, Greek sources have since said that that's completely untrue and they would have never agreed to that. Sky's political correspondent Ali Fortescue has more, and just to warn you that her report does contain flash photography.
A world leader in the UK for high-level diplomatic talks. Not with the Prime Minister, though, but the man who wants to replace him.
On the economy, it's a really strong story, isn't it?
It was around this time that Rishi Sunak disinvited the Greek leader from a meeting in Number 10, an age-old cultural debate igniting a fresh diplomatic row.
It's very clear that the Elgin Marbles are actually protected under law, and under that law, they have to stay in the British Museum. The Greek Prime Minister was offered a meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister, and of course we do value our relationship with Greece, and we work a lot in partnership.
The location of the Parthenon marbles in the British Museum has been fiercely contested for decades. On the weekend, the Greek Prime Minister compared it to the Mona Lisa being cut in half. After raising the subject, he was swiftly snubbed by the British government and headed home early.
The Greek side have called this a bad day for relations between London and Athens, and it is highly unusual for this sort of high-level meeting to be cancelled at such short notice, particularly surprising, I think, from a Prime Minister who's wanted to be different from his predecessors, not pick fights and set a new tone in international relations.
I think there are two reasons why Rishi Sunak may have wanted this row. One, and both are not particularly attractive. One is a personal one, which is he simply has a thin skin and was cheesed off and decided, I'm not going to meet this guy. And the second is, I think, worse, which is that people on one side are depicted as kind of unpatriotic and doing down Britain, and people on the other side are seen as doing up Britain and defending our heritage. And if he wants to make the Parthenon sculptures a culture war, I think that's pretty unattractive.
British politics may be at play, but it is a row that obviously resonates a long way from Westminster.
This was not a friendly behaviour.
our relationship come from the too far from the past, and they will go too far in the future. We share the same values. We fought together in 2 world wars. We were always together, and this was not the right behavior from your prime minister to our prime minister.
The fate of the Elgin Marbles, whether they'll ever make it back to the Acropolis, isn't just about history, but about politics too. And this has now turned into a genuine diplomatic row between the UK and one of its closest allies. Ali Fortescue, Sky News.
Coming up on the UK tonight, a golden ticket to the Wonka world premiere in London. We'll have the latest from the red carpet for you. And Celtic have been knocked out of the Champions League following defeat to Lazio. Details on the way.
It was an exciting night, meeting all these great people who support conservation. So exciting, and yeah, I had the privilege to be with the Prince of Wales. We sat side by side, and he's just a big supporter and fan of conservation across the world. So yeah, it was really, really an honor.
Why did you win the award? What was it for?
So my award is based on our work back in Cameroon. I work on great apes, chimpanzees, and gorillas, and we do community conservation. So the area we work is called the Ebo Forest. It's not a protected area, but since 2012, we've been working with grassroots communities for them to conserve, this great biodiversity that they have.
And what was the Prince asking you about?
Oh, yeah, the Prince was asking about my work. So he was really excited about the fact that we observe chimpanzees cracking nuts in the Ebo Forest. And that was a novel behavior of chimps on this side of Central Africa. So he was really excited about that and wanted to know a bit more. So our work is actually building capacity in grassroots communities to protect what they have, because these communities, their history, ancestry, livelihoods, everything is tied to this forest. So there are actually some threats, to the chimpanzees, gorillas, and all the wildlife in the forest.
What sort of threat?
So we have mainly habitat loss, which is linked to agriculture. Is also linked to logging and also the expansion of agro-industry. And this also facilitates hunting and the bushmeat trade. So these are some of the things we're working with the local communities so they can actually monitor the wildlife in their forest. They carry out alternative livelihood activities to reduce the pressure on the forest. If you see how intelligent these animals are, then you just, see they are just so much like you and I. But yeah, they live in the forest, and as a result, we who are privileged to, be able to do things that are, harming them, we should also be doing things that can safeguard these animals.
Welcome back to the UK tonight. Coming up, all the latest from the Wonka premiere in central London. But first, the Willy Wonka of sport. Teddy Draper is here.
Compliment. Thank you very much.
I'll take that. I like that. We're going to talk about Tiger Woods.
We are.
Big news from him today, and a return to action quicker than we thought. How quick?
Well, he's come back on Thursday. We knew he'd probably be involved because it's the Hero Challenge in Bahamas, which he's hosted since 2000. Kind of a charity event. Celebrities play earlier in the week, and then it tees off for real on Thursday, where he'll be with his long-standing friend, Justin Thomas. But I think the significance is what Tiger Woods has had to say in terms of his attitude, his energy, his optimism today, because he limped out of the Masters, which he'd won 5 of in April. Really sombre sort of scenes back in Georgia in the spring. And you felt at that time, at the age of 47, he's going to be 48 next month, that perhaps it was the last time we'd see Tiger Woods. Perhaps he wouldn't get near, and it seemed for a few years he wouldn't get near Jack Nicklaus's record of 18 years. But Tiger talking today and saying that the foot he injured in that big car crash a couple of years ago in California is fused and back now. Got a few other issues, but he's back and willing and fit to compete.
I'm excited to compete and play, and I'm just as curious as all of you are to see what happens, because I haven't done it in a while. And I can tell you this, that I don't have any of the pain that I had at Augusta or pre that in my ankle. Now, well, other parts are taking the brunt of the load, so I'm a little bit more sore in other areas, but the ankle's good, so.
So he's back. How confident is the golf community in Tiger? Because, you know, he'll want to win more majors, won't he? But I suppose it depends if his body's up to it. What's the word on the golf circuit?
Well, alluded that to his knee and his back, didn't he? He had that big car crash in 2021. Even before that, long-standing knee problems. Won the 2008 US Open on a bad knee, limping around that back problems. Had fused back issues as well, joints. But he seems to be the energy very optimistic. And I just wonder, last year there were 4 different major winners. No one at the moment is really dominant in golf. You could argue maybe Brooks Koepka is approaching that, but 2 new time winners last year. I just wonder if he feels that perhaps Jack Nicklaus's record of 18, him being on 15, isn't unassailable. Nicklaus got his final major, at the age of 46 in 1986 at the Masters. Just wonder if Tiger will be eyeing up playing monthly and winning the Masters in this year as well. So we'll see how the Tiger Woods renaissance goes. And that's off the field with golf. Golf to come this weekend, but a lot of football tonight. We'll update you now on that in a moment.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
John, welcome to Old Trafford.
Thanks very much.
You're a man of many talents, but we're interested in you today for one major reason.
Okay.
Season ticket holder at Manchester United, and you told me you're in the where?
I believe I'm in the E of Manchester, towards the back of that bottom tier there. Every time I sort of do a job or sign on to something, I always think, well, at least that's my season tickets secured for another season. It's always my priority. I'd hate to be without it.
And you have any recollection of that, the first time you actually walked through the steps or the pitch, saw the players?
I just couldn't believe it. I've got very, very clear memories of that game. It was New Year's Day.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
The stars have been out in London tonight for the world premiere of the latest adaptation of Roald Dahl's classic Willy Wonka. Timothée Chalamet, Hugh Grant and Olivia Colman are starring in the Paul King-directed prequel about the wacky magician come chocolate maker. Katie Spencer has more.
He is one of the biggest stars on the planet. Now Gen Z's answer to Leonardo DiCaprio, Timothée Chalamet has turned eccentric chocolatier.
You see, I'm something of a magician, inventor, and chocolate maker. So quiet up and listen down. Nope, scratch that, reverse it.
Playing Willy Wonka in this, the prequel to Roald Dahl's children's classic. It's such an iconic role and a beautiful world you've created.
Yes.
How did this compare to other films you've been in?
It was very different because I'd never worked on something that was so light in tone and so generous and joyful.
So you're the funny little man who's been following me.
I will have you know that I am a perfectly respectable size for an Oompa Loompa.
An Oompa what now?
For Hugh Grant, no small task, cast as a new-look Oompa Loompa after the director turned to Dahl's books for inspiration.
They don't really have much dialogue in either of the movies or the book, but they do have these extraordinary long poem songs that Roald Dahl wrote, and I was reading them, and they're so funny, but they're sarcastic and biting and witty, and they've got such verbal fireworks in them. As I was reading, I started hearing Hugh Grant's voice, and once I had that, it wasn't such a leap to go, what would you look like this big with orange skin and bright green hair? And I thought he might look pleasingly ridiculous, and I think I'm right.
Good night, sir. I am going flat.
33 years after his death, it is impossible to know what Roald Dahl would make of all of this, but we know he famously hated the 1971 Gene Wilder version.
So it's a bit of a stretch to think he'd be jumping for joy about a prequel. Not that that's a concern to film bosses. When it comes to authors these days, dead or alive, it's all about investing in a known brand. Rather than take a risk on something new, rehashing popular old books is seen as a safer bet.
My name is Willy Wonka.
But will the combination of Dahl and Chalamet be the hit they're hoping for?
It felt like a gift. Yeah, like a gift of an experience and just a gift to work on.
After early promotional trailers for the film were widely mocked on social media, all eyes now on Timothée Chalamet can one of the coolest actors out there win over audiences with his Wonka? Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Time now for a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A generally northerly flow will make it cold all week, with some overnight frost, fog and a risk of snow and ice. Inland areas looking mostly fine this evening, but showers are going to affect northern, eastern and Irish Sea coastal counties. They'll be wintry in the north and east, with low-level snow likely over north-east Scotland. Exposed coastal areas can expect further showers overnight, wintry in the east. Most other places dry and clear, but southern Britain looks cloudy for a time with the odd shower possible. The far southwest of Ireland may see some rain later. It's going to turn frosty for most of us, with dense freezing fog in places. Icy stretches will follow any showers in the north and east.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
That's all from the UK tonight. You can catch up on the highlights on our webpage. Just scan the QR code on your screen. You can share your thoughts with us as well. We'll see you tomorrow night at 8 o'clock.